Everyone, this is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. We just returned from our fire drill. So we'll continue on with testimony from our friends from VZAC. Glad you made it through and glad you found your way back.
Always good to have a fire drill. Never too many of those. So I'm going to start again on the Vermont 529 plan and move forward. So as I said just before we left, the Vermont 529 plan is probably one of the biggest success stories in Vermont that we very seldom talk about. So Vermonters right now have over $500 million that they have saved for higher education expenses in the Vermont 529 plan. And the same families that have been saving have taken out and used over $300,000 to pay for higher education. So we're closing in on $1 billion moving through this program. So, every dollar saved, as you all know, is a dollar that a family is not having to borrow. So that's saving them. They get both the power of the interest to help them, and they're not borrowing to pay for their children to go on to school. In addition,
Ma'am, I've got a question for you. How much did you say was saved the total amount?
the total amount is just over 800 million.
800. And do you use that for other things, or does that just stay there until the students need it, or do you
Right, so
use that
it's,
as a bank?
no, it is their money. So they're investing and putting money into their own accounts. So there's slightly over 27,000 individual accounts
Interest bearing?
that have been set up. Yeah, some are guaranteed returns, some are in investments based on the age of the student. There's some choice that the account owners make when the accounts are set up. And then the interest that is gained and the risk, because some of these are investments, but belongs to that family when they go to make their payments for higher education.
So the family can choose whether or not to invest.
The families can choose, if they put money into a 529 plan, their own funds, they can choose what type of program they'd like to put it in. So I think, Scott, how many options are there?
So there are kind of four core options, and the two most popular, one Marilyn was describing is called the age-based. And similar to a retirement strategy, if they, if you're in the age-based and it's a young kindergartner that is the designated beneficiary, the mix of investments will be more heavily oriented towards equities. As that child gets closer and closer to the post-secondary education or the withdrawal date, you'll see automatically that mix of investments rebalance towards more fixed income and guaranteed interest options. So that's really the most popular kind of set it and kind of forget it kind of path that investors will take. They also, in addition, have the option to be able to select something that's relatively unusual. It's a product that we have with TIAA and CREF. That's a guaranteed income. So it's an interest-based product that there's very, very low risk for folks that have lower risk tolerances. And you can also pick kind of one of two options that are predominantly, a mix of, it's basically index fund that you can be invested in if you want to be more active in allocating your own investments.
And I'll only ask a couple more. I hope you'll forgive me, Mr. Chairman. At what age is it permissible for a potential student or parent able to withdraw the funds?
So the students, the family, the account owner can withdraw the funds at any point, but in order to receive the benefit, because those earnings are tax exempt, if they're used for post-secondary educational expenses, they could be used for an apprenticeship, they could be used to pay down on student loans, I believe. Those are the three things that you can do with these funds. If you were to withdraw the funds to use for some other purpose, then the earnings become taxable, and also there's a tax credit with this particular program that would be at risk.
So if the student decides not to go to college or trade school, that would be taxable?
So there's a couple of things you can do. The way these programs are set up, they're very transferable. So if you've got two children and child A, let's say they're just an extremely wonderful athlete, they get that full athletic scholarship, they don't need any of the money, you can take that entire account and assign it to student B without any problem. It's just a name change on the account beneficiary.
Sounds great, really does.
It really is. It's a wonderful program.
Also, grandparents can also provide funding as well.
Oh, grandparents can open these. I have a very dear friend of mine. She was my maid of honor, not that that matters, but she's opened them for the two children that live next door to her. They're like her grandchildren. You know how we all know how that kind of works. And yeah, so anyone can open them and anyone can put funds in for someone else if they choose to.
My children have one too, so if you want to contribute, let me know.
For those listening.
Yes, I would love that. But the age, that option for depending on their age could be started when they're born. It's so helpful because as with new parents, not knowing how you want to invest this money, it's just a really user-friendly program. So.
Thank you. Yes.
There are limitations on housing, correct? It can be used for education, but not for housing?
It can be used for any billable expense. It can be used for room and board, tuition and fees. I think, and they need to be schools that are recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. I believe they all have to be, which we refer to as Title IV schools. So there are some schools perhaps that a student could find that they might not be able to use these funds or use them and still receive all the benefits that we've talked about. Okay, so let me keep moving because I know that the chairman is going to give me a motion here in a second. So in addition to the 529 plan, VSAC also has 3 federal grants that we receive that allow us to provide counseling to middle school and high school students. We do that in almost every high school and middle school in the state. So we have a counselor that works in that school with a caseload of students. And then we also have a group of these counselors who works very specifically with adult students across Vermont. So an adult student can be anyone that's no longer associated with a high school. So that person could be 18 years old, they could be 38 years old, they could be 58 years old. But if you're no longer associated with a high school and you are looking to go back to school, we have adult counselors that will sit down and help someone think about their career, think about what is the education path that gets you to that career. How do you apply for school? How do you apply for financial aid? They'll work with them on all of the things that maybe you could think of that a school counselor might have helped you with at one point in your life. We also go into these schools and we do forms nights. We help everyone fill out forms, whether they're part of our outreach program or not. We work with the entire state of Vermont on applying for financial aid, on understanding how the process works. So those are both done in person and virtually. We do administer the Vermont State Grant Program, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today because I want to get to the workforce development pieces. But at some point, if you are interested, I'd be happy to come back and talk about the state grant. We administer the 802 Opportunity Grant. I am going to spend a few minutes on that. I have a slide on that. That is one of the newest grant programs we run, and it is absolutely a workforce development program. We administer more than 150 scholarships worth more than $9.7 million. And those, as I mentioned earlier, are coming from private donors, philanthropic groups. The state has a number that we run. The federal government does as well. And of course, VSAC has its own. And then last but not least, VSAC also has a loan that we make available to students. Because of the way financial aid works and the way the federal loans have caps on how large they can be, we find a number of students that even when they've subtracted all of their financial aid and their federal loans, there is still a gap that exists. So VSAC has a low interest loan that we administer to Vermont residents going anywhere to school or to any student attending a Vermont school. So if someone from Massachusetts wants to use this loan, they're welcome to do that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the workforce development funding that VSAC has received over the last few years and the programs that we're currently running. And I'm going to do a slightly deeper dive into most of these. So 802 Opportunity is the program that allows any Vermonter whose family income is $75,000 or less to attend CCV tuition and fee free. So it builds on top of other types of aids. We look at their federal Pell Grant and their Vermont State Grant, and then we make up the difference with 802 Opportunity. We'll talk a little bit about that program because that's a very, very important program in this process.
Was this sent to our email account?
It's on the website. It wasn't.
Which website?
The legislature.
Okay. Because I'd like to send some of this stuff back home to.
It's on our webpage.
Is it? Okay. Thank you.
So I'm going to break for a minute. I wanted to say one of the things that VSAC does do, and this is probably like an awkward time to put this in, but because you mentioned your constituents, I want to say it while it's in my head. VSAC works with Vermonters all the time. We have people calling us all the time with questions and with concerns and with observations. If you have a constituent that you're working with that you think we can help, you're going to have my name and address. You're going to have Scott's name and his email address, as well as our phone numbers. Don't hesitate to put those people in touch with us. That's always an option. So we love having our material go to them. But if you're really trying to work through a thorny issue, just let us know, and we'd be happy to help with that.
I speak to my constituents all the time, and sometimes this sort of like workforce training, their future job training sort of comes up, and so I just recommend that they call VSAC. When they call VSAC, who do they speak with? And like, I don't hear, often, you just send people in that direction. I don't necessarily always hear back until I've run into them on the street or something. And so I don't really know how successful it perhaps was. Who do they speak with when they call you?
So we have,
Organization.
sure, we have a trained staff of counselors who are phone counselors, and they can counsel on our grant programs, our loan programs, and our scholarship programs. We also have specialists. So if you started out with someone and you got down to a level of detail that it would take an expert to understand what you were trying to nuance, then we would just transfer you to someone who was really the expert on that particular program. But for the most part, they will start with these phone counselors, and then if we need to pass them on. And that's if they call. The other thing that folks will do is they will call and say, could I speak with an outreach counselor? And those adult students are then set up with an appointment to meet face-to-face, virtually or live, with an outreach counselor.
Good, thank you. I just want to make sure that I was doing the right thing and that. Anyway, they would get their questions.
I have zero doubt that anyone you send through would get their question answered. The staff is really very trained and very good at what they do. But the other thing they'll do is if there's something coming through that they're unsure of, they don't hesitate to escalate that to a supervisor, to an expert, or to Scott and myself if it seems that it's more something that we could answer because it's policy driven, not necessarily how does this work, but why does this work this way?
Thank you.
So the advancement grant is the oldest grant of its type in the country. This allows students to take training programs, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit more as well. Again, this training program has been in place since 1985. So the state of Vermont was allowing Vermonters to use state money to pay for workforce development back then, way before other states stepped into this space. And then we have a whole series of new programs that all fall under interest-free forgivable loans. Interest-free forgivable loans they look like a scholarship when the student receives them, and they act like a scholarship. So we pay them to the school against their bill, their tuition and fee bill. And then the student is signing a promissory note. And the promise is that they will work for some period of time. Most of them are 1 year of work for 1 year of funding in the field in which the state of Vermont trained them. If they meet that commitment, and VSAC does the follow-up to verify if they are employed and are they working for the full year. If they meet that requirement, then the loan is forgiven. It never becomes a loan. If they do not meet that requirement, because as we know, life intervenes all the time with people, that maybe they couldn't finish the program, maybe they moved out of state for whatever reason, then that will become a loan, and VSAC will collect on that loan using the lending side of our operations to do that. Under that category, we have early childhood education. We have Vermont nursing, which we'll talk about a little bit. That one was received a lot of attention last year. Vermont Trades is the newest of the forgivable loan programs. We'll talk about that one as well. Vermont National Guard, there's one for dentists, there's one for primary care physicians. And there's two that were created last year by the legislature that have still not been stood up, but they are being worked on right now. And that is one to encourage students to become nurse faculty. And the second one is to increase the number of Vermont mental health professionals in the state. So let me talk for a minute about the advancement grant. So as I said, the advancement grant was created in 1985. This is a phenomenally targeted program. So all of VSAC's grant programs, not the scholarships, but all of the grants are need-based programs. So students have to show financial need. The average recipient of an advancement grant is 35. She is a single mom, and she makes less than $24,000 a year. So this is someone who absolutely needs to find a training program or an educational program that helps her move forward and be able to live in Vermont and have an affordable wage.
Under the Vermont Advancement Grant, what's the spectrum of where someone can come to get that money?
So students find the training programs that they are interested in, but the types of programs that we see a lot of, CDL licensing is something we see a lot of. We see a lot of LNAs, students who aren't ready to be nurses yet, but they want to be nursing assistants. Massage therapy is another one that we will see. Pretty much anything you can think of that you could name to me that's a training program. We have students that are linemen. We don't have a lineman school in Vermont, but there are some out of state. We have students who are at lineman school using this grant. Help me, Scott, I'm blanking, and it's truly endless.
Well, let's say, somebody becomes an LNA and they want to go on to become an RN, would they be able to draw on these grants?
So they'd start with an advancement grant to become an LNA. And then when they wanted to become an actual either RN or LN, they would move into our state grant program, our incentive grants, and they'd also be eligible for that forgivable loan program for nurses that pays full tuition.
That's great. I was born in the wrong year.
All right. So the next slide just gives you a bit of a hint. Actually, I should have looked at this slide. It would have helped me. Construction workers, linemen, a cosmetologist, pretty much anything that a student can think of. So if someone came and said, I want to be a bartender and I'm going to go to bartending school, that would go through advancement grant. That's perfectly fine. It just needs to be something that's going to allow them to have a position in Vermont that allows them to earn a livable wage. That's what we're trying to do here.
How onerous are these application forms? I'm thinking of persons who struggle with literacy or new Americans, persons where English is not their first language. Do you assist them in completing the forms?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah. So for the advancement grant, the form is actually very simple because we recognize that these are students who, for whatever reason, didn't enter higher education or training after high school. They took some type of a break. So I think if you might be familiar with the free application for federal student aid, which is a pretty intense federal form that collects information. We don't use that for this. What we ask for is demographic information and a copy of your tax return if you filed one. So it's not a high bar. The other thing is we have outreach counselors that are helping students fill this form out on a regular basis. And in fact, one of our, maybe even two or three of our counselors work in the Winooski area, the Burlington area, where we see our largest populations of new American students. But we have our outreach counselors live in the areas they work in. So there is an outreach counselor that services the Rutland area. There's an outreach counselor up in St. Albans in that area. There's some in Chittenden County, Windsor County, you name it. We've got counselors, as I said, in almost every high school. They live in their counties as well as these adult counselors.
Some of you may have known this just had a different name. It was non-degree grant program, which we have, this committee worked on a number of years ago when we started really getting into workforce. And the understanding that education is education, and it doesn't matter if you're going on to college or if you're going to a certification program, that they're all valuable. And so we decided to change the name to get away from kind of that stigmatism that might be out there. And we landed on advancement grants to helping Vermonters advance.
Cool.
Thank you. So the only other piece of information I'll say about the advancement grant, we do run a survey every 2 years because what we're checking on is how effective is the program. So that survey was just published. It's on our website. I certainly can make it available. I can send copies here to Andrew if you would like them. But one of the things we found this year was that we were looking to say, did your salary increase? So some people are looking to move to a job where they have a career path, but some people want to stay where they are and be more valuable to that employer. Of the group that about 50% of them said, my salary increased between full-time and part-time employment. And 45% of them said that their salary increased by $3 an hour or more. So $3 an hour for a full-time student, $120 a week, that is a significant difference in what a young family or any aged family would be able to do. So we're really pleased with this program and how it continues to be really effective. The other thing that we check is for those who are going on to school, do they intend to continue their education? And the majority of students who use non-degree or advancement grant to test those academic waters, which you can do with this program, then make the decision to step into college and use the degree programs and keep moving forward. Okay, so the next program I want to talk,
So when you're talking about income increasing, I'm assuming you've been tracking this data over time, or is this a brand new
So
data point?
we're asking, each time we run the survey, we ask that cohort of students who just completed their advancement grant training. So the training ends, or it doesn't necessarily end. The program ends on June 30th. We start the new program on July 1. So in October, we'll go back to this group that took it from June 30th all the way for a whole year back and say, tell us what happened with your advancement grant. Did you complete your program? Did you find work? Were you earning more money after you took this program? Those types of questions. So it's just for that cohort.
Yeah. But you've been running it over time. So
Yes.
you have many. So when you look at the increase in income, do you take into account as the minimum wage increase has been in place? Because the last few years, we've had a pretty big jump in minimum wage increase. So do you kind of, separate that from this information? I don't know.
That is a really good question, and I will have to go back and ask the research folks who ran the survey what they did with that.
Okay, thank you.
So, like, a lot of these programs you mentioned seems like they're a few months programs or whatever. Are there advancement grants for programs? Let's say someone is in a 2-year massage program. Is it a grant for the both 2 years? Do they have to apply for separate years? How's that?
They would reapply. So yes, we need to make sure that they're still enrolled and the cost of the program for the second year, because as you know, most programs get more expensive over time. So you do have to apply each year. And normally, to your point, we do have a number of students that are applying for, it could be a 6-week program, it could be a 3-month program. And then maybe a little later in the year, they say, I'd like to do this again. And then they'll reapply for something to complement what they just did. We allow students to receive 6 advancement grants in a lifetime. So we're recognizing that it's not one and done, but like the Lineman School, that's an 18-month program. So that is funding for that program. Other programs, as you know, are very short. LNAs are sometimes up to a year. It's entirely the way the school builds their training program. And Scott, did you want to add something?
I think you covered what I was going to add.
Okay, perfect. So let's move on to 802 Opportunity. So this is the program that was started last year by the legislature. In the first year that we've run it, so not this current year, but last year, the income cutoff was $50,000. Last year, you folks increased that income cutoff to $75,000. So any Vermont resident, and we're talking about families here, and if you're self-supporting and single, you're the family. And if you're 18, 19 years old, still living with your parents, it's your mom and dad's income that we're looking at. But if that income is $75,000 or less, then between Pell, VSAC, and this program, you will attend CCV tuition and fee-free. This builds on, as I mentioned, on state and federal aid. What we're trying to do with this program is we're trying to increase access, and we're also trying to lower the price for Vermonters. On the access side, CCV offers 12 associate programs, 23 certificate programs that students can choose to major in. They also offer articulation agreements with UVM, the state college system, and other schools in Vermont that allow you to take your first 2 years at CCV and then transfer to one of those four-year institutions. Last year, what we saw with this particular program is across the nation, enrollment at community colleges fell, and in Vermont, enrollment increased. So this program really allowed students to continue their education when nationally that was not what was happening. The other thing that happened that we could see in our work from last year, borrowing at CCV decreased by 45%. 50% of the students that received this, let me say that differently, 50% of their entire degree enrollment was funded by this program. So this is making a substantial difference for Vermonters, and it's making a substantial difference in CCV's enrollment. So kind of a win on both sides of these things. UVM, I may have just said this, but UVM says that CCV is their largest source of transfer students. So, and CCV has a whole pathway that if you say to your counselor going in, I'm interested in transferring to UVM for my junior year in this major, they will say, then these are the courses you need to take and pass in order for that to happen. So it's a really clear pathway for them. The reason this program works as well as it does is how simple that message is, right? There's no extra application. So students have to fill out the free application for federal student aid and the Vermont State Grant app. That's it. If they are going to CCV and they are eligible, they will be awarded 802 opportunities. So there's no application barrier. There's nothing else that needs to occur. And we collect all of our data on the outcomes of this program from CCV and our own records, so they don't have to fill out a survey at the end. It's really totally seamless for these students. Some of the things
I love this program in particular because I think it's so responsive to meeting Vermonters. There's so many CCV campuses around the state. I'm curious, given what we have been seeing with wages sort of artificially going up, I mean because when you look at real wages, people aren't necessarily taking home more because of the cost of goods going up. So I'm wondering about the AGI number and if you have had any thought around adjusting that, either having a gradual step down so more people can qualify, because I just wonder about folks who are starting to bump up against that $75,000 AGI figure, but the cost of everything is going up. So it makes a program that's so vital like this out of reach because people are starting to bump over that. So I'm just wondering if there's been any conversation about looking at that figure given what's going on right now in our.
Right. So certainly VSAC and CCV has talked a little bit about that. Our request this year, and this is one of our priorities going into this year. So this funding right now is general funds, but it was a 2-year allocation of funding that was made 2 years ago. We are asking to have this be made permanent funding because right now I've got students calling our line saying, can I have 802 opportunity for next year? And we're saying, we don't know yet. We're asking, but we don't know the answer. So again, the simplicity of message here is really important. So being able to say to someone, yes, you can have it, and I know you'll be able to have it for the next 3 years or forever is important. So that was really what we were asking for this year. But you're not wrong. There's nothing magic about $75,000. Would we like to see it be stepped up? Or would we like to see it be $100,000? Sure. I think We aren't asking for that this year just because we really want that permanent funding. It seems to us to be the most important part of it. But yes, it would be lovely to see that go up because you are right. A family making $75,000 a year is not, I don't think any of us would argue they were wealthy. Especially when we're talking about two parents working and two or three children, that's not a family. That's a family doing fine in Vermont, but they're not wealthy.
Especially the price of eggs. Eggs keep getting brought up in every, right, a lot of economic briefings.
Scott, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you articulated it, well. Our goal, this program has demonstrated so much success in the first 2 years. It's attracting national attention. As Marilyn indicated, enrollment at community colleges dropped by 20% in the first year of the pandemic. Through this program and through some other things, CCD has seen enrollment go up, which speaks to the power of the simplicity of the message and the ease of access to the programs at CCD between the mix of being online and then the regional centers across the state. Our goal is to secure permanence so that Vermonters know they can count on it. But as Marilyn indicated, we would be very supportive of, obtaining the resources to be able to increase that threshold. At 75,000, we estimate it covers roughly 50% of Vermont households. To kind of put this in perspective, moving to 100,000 would, allow us to serve additional families who, as I think you've really clearly articulated, are feeling pressed by the current economic environment.
How do you get this information out? I mean, of course, it's through CCD, but high schools and.
So VSAC and CCV did a full court press over the last 2 years. We've used, one of our most successful ways of getting this out is front porch forums. So we are running ads. If you haven't seen them, I'm surprised because we've been running a lot of them over the last few months. So they're in front porch forums. We use radio ads. We've been blanketing the radio stations with this message. Scott and Joyce Judy, who's the president of CCV, just did a op-ed, is that the right word? That's been published in a number of papers, and now they were on Channel 5 last night. I think they're going to be on Channel 22 tonight and 44. So we're using television to the extent that that's possible. CCV sent postcards out to every single student who's ever attended CCV and had not completed their degree. So
I serve on the select board in Bennington, and a year or two ago we did a survey amongst Bennington residents. And it was amazing. 60.2% said they got their information from social media, particularly Facebook.
we use Facebook. We use Facebook and trying to think what else we're using out there. Snapchat, I believe, and a few others. Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, we're hitting everything we can possibly think of where students might be.
That's great.
And then in addition, I would just add, we use the traditional channels as well. So working through school counselors.
Yeah.
We're obviously have a presence in most of the high schools kind of across the state. And then I think as Marilyn will lean into it a little bit, we also collaborate very closely with PNL and co-train our counselors so that as you send a constituent or a constituent comes to us, each group is educated with regard to the programs that the other offers, can do very, very basic kind of education and knows then when to do a referral.
Okay, so just because of where we are with time, I'm not going to stop on some of the outcomes, but you can see that first year was pretty successful. Almost 60% of the students got a B or better average. 83% of the students successfully completed their course work. Those are really high averages for especially this at-risk group that we're talking about. So we're seeing good results here. The next program I did want to talk about just for a moment is the Vermont Nursing Workforce Incentive Loan Program. This is one of the forgivable loans. So this program has actually morphed a little bit, but it's been around for about 20 years. Back in the day, we were funding 8 students a year. And then last year, 2 years ago, we started using global commitment funds, and this went from a $50,000 a year program to a $1.1 million a year program. This year, we have 146 students so far that are enrolled in nursing programs who have committed to work in Vermont upon graduation. They are going to all of our Vermont schools that offer nursing programs, so they all have enrollment out of this program. And last year, the legislature opened this up so that you could actually go to a school out of state. As long as you agreed to work in Vermont, you could go to school anywhere. And so we have 29 students that are attending schools outside of Vermont.
This is part of our upcoming spending that we're asked to look at. But and I saw in here that, it's going to be $1 million. How many nurses do you get on, a year with that $1 million?
So it covers full tuition up to the UVM tuition level. So I'm going to say, I think that our maximum award is like $16,000 at UVM, and then there's one VTC program that's a $21,000 program. We'll fund those completely. If you go to the private schools or you go out of state, we cap you at the $16,000 you would have received at UVM. So it's just a matter of who's going to what schools. So it's hard to come up with a number. But basically, I have not done this in my head. If you took $1 million and divided it by 16,000, that's right now the maximum that we could probably do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next program I'll walk you through pretty quickly is the Vermont Trades Program. This program came out of the governor's office and the legislature last year. This is another forgivable loan program. The difference is this program is really focused on training programs. So this one, again, will cover full tuition. And we ask that every student who's applying for the Vermont Trades apply for their advancement grant or their incentive grant first, and then we build on top of that. And that's trying to keep their borrowing down if we can. We're seeing, so one of the ways that this was originally set up, it had a fairly limited number of programs that it could cover: building trades, mechanical trades, medical trades, et cetera. By the time it came out of the legislature, that had been expanded with energy trades and a number of others, but then it went on to say, and all high demand sectors. We worked with the Department of Labor to say, help us understand what is a high demand sector. And it was easier for the Department of Labor to tell us what was not a high demand sector than it was to tell us what was. So what we did at that point is we said that this program could be used for any educational program that took 2 years or less, trying to keep it as focused on the trades as we possibly could to keep it true to what was originally the intent of the program. Right now, we have students coming from every county in Vermont, so there's wide understanding of what this program is. And this list that you see of trades programs that's listed, we have students studying in every one of those programs. So we're hitting on all of those categories.
Is it just a box that they can check on the advancement grant application form? So I'm a grant writer, and so my mission is to simplify things for folks, especially students, overworked nonprofit and business staff or owners, small business owners. And so that just seeing that this is coupled with the advancement grant, I wonder if they could be.
Yeah, it isn't right now because there's questions that we ask on the Vermont Trades Program that aren't asked on the advancement grant. So we do have them fill out a separate application for this. But because some of these students might be using advancement grant, but some of them might be using our degree programs, as long as it's a 2-year program or less. So you might think of someone at VTC who's in an engineering program, their 2-year degree. They could also apply for this trades money to help offset their tuition.
Okay.
The next program that I'll mention in our workforce development suite of opportunities is the Vermont National Guard Tuition Benefit Program. This program has also been around for a large number of years. This is not new. And this program provides up to full tuition for Guard members. It was expanded to allow the students to use it for graduate school. It's been expanded to allow students to use it for second degrees. So they are working really hard. They use this as a recruitment tool, and I'm sure at some point Ken Gregg will be in here to testify if he hasn't already, and he will talk about how successful that has been for them. But we currently have 84 students that are using the program to help further their career while they serve in the National Guard. And as a forgivable loan program, their commitment is 2 years of service in the Guard for each year of education that they receive. And that wraps up what I brought on my slides to talk about. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have that we haven't already put on the table.
Other questions for Marilyn or Scott?
I just want to circle back to the reaching out to adults who need or want additional education. So I think you mentioned Front Porch Forum. Is that how else do you reach out to the adults?
So-
It's a rather diffuse group. I would think it'd be very difficult.
So adults, for example, I believe right now, I may be wrong, but I think if you're in Chittenden County, because there's not a lot of places that have public transportation, but they're using bus sides to talk about 802 opportunity. It was the back cover of the Vermont Business Magazine, making sure that business owners knew that this opportunity existed. As Scott said, we partner really closely with the Department of Labor. They're aware of this program and very aware of the advancement grants. So Department of Labor, when probably a few times a year, but we will ask them to publish something in the things that they are sending out. We do the same thing with the foster programs. We'll ask them to put information in their newsletters. We ask the high schools to put information in their newsletters. Sometimes the adults that we reach are the parents of the high school students, right? So that's another way. Word of mouth, honestly, is one of the biggest ways that students learn about advancement grants. And every provider who receives advancement grant funding to help offset the cost of their students' cost of education, talk to students that are interested in their program. So there's a lot of buzz about these programs, but we tend to use radio, we tend to use Front Porch Forum, we tend to use existing newsletters, going back to that very first slide, leveraging the partners we have to ask them to put things in the existing newsletters that are already out there. Want to add anything to that?
No, I think you responded well. The only thing I would add is that that's kind of the program side, but as Marilyn had indicated at the beginning, we have career and education counselors focusing on adults who live within the different regions across the state. And so for access to those services, if somebody is looking for the career and education counseling piece, in addition to everything that Marilyn just described, our counselors are embedded within the communities and are working with all the community action groups. And, all of the other groups within their communities in order to make sure that people are aware of their services and referrals come organically through the networks that are created in your local community.
Thank you.
Would VSAC be opposed to auto enrollment at CCV for the 802 opportunity program? When they enroll in a CCV curricula or school? It's just.
So there is, remember there's that income cutoff.
Yes.
So in order for us to know they meet the income cutoff, we need them to complete the free application for federal student aid, and we need them to complete the Vermont Grant App so we can consider them for their Pell Grant and their state grant. But as soon as they've done that, they are automatically considered for this 802 opportunity. There's nothing they do at CCV. There's no box they check. There's nothing they do at VSAC. On the FAFSA, when you fill that out, you indicate what colleges you're interested in. If you list CCV, then you will receive an award for CCV that shows what your 802 opportunity funding would be.
Thank you.
Because remember, we want to make sure that we leverage all the other federal and state programs before we layer on the 802 opportunity grants and stretch them out a lot further and get a lot more people through the doorway and getting information.
This is really informative. I'm gonna be running my mouth in Bennington about it.
Thank you folks for coming in. I think we have a good understanding of VZAC and how important it is to Vermonters. And being such a great partner with us. We kind of piled on to you last year. You know, with, you know, all the ARPA dollars that were out there and the ability for us to be able to get more people into the education sector, not just in the colleges, but in the certification programs, and to get Vermonters better jobs through education. You know, they've been such a great partner with us and doing everything they can to work with us. And, you know, working with the administration, I think we're all on the same page, working together. So we really appreciate everything that VZAC does, and especially what you all do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure to be in the committee as much as I was last year. I was afraid you were getting a little sick of my face on your screen, but you know, I'm happy to come back anytime if you have other things you want to talk about, or if you want to dive into any of these programs in more detail.
I think there's a budget, you know, we're doing budget adjustment now, but when we start working on the budget, you know, the governor's laying it out Friday. We'll get our marching orders from appropriations. We will certainly have you in to go through more, you know, these things in depth, and in order for us to give our recommendation to appropriations. So we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The committee, that's it for today. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock, we'll be back on again. Susanna Davis will be in. We're not sure Wei Wei's gonna be able to make it with us. She's been ill. Curtis, I believe, is coming in, as well as Mark Hughes at Piper. So, we'll start there and continue on. So, any questions from the committee before we sign on?